Zorathil was once a proud warrior, a hero of the Valkyrie fleet. She had earned her place among the elite pilots of her people, admired for her skills in battle and her unmatched intelligence. The Valkyrie, a proud and ancient alien race, ruled over many worlds, spreading their power across the stars. Zorathil had once believed in their cause, fighting alongside her comrades to protect their empire and ensure its dominance. But that belief began to fade when she saw the corruption within her people's leadership. The higher-ups were not as honorable as she had once thought. The Valkyrie Empire had started to become ruthless, more interested in power and control than justice. Zorathil had always stood for something more than just power. She believed in doing what was right. That belief made her a target. One fateful day, Zorathil uncovered a secret that could shake the foundations of the Valkyrie Empire. She learned that the Empire's leaders were planning to invade and conquer peaceful worlds, including Earth, for their own selfish gain. She couldn't stand by and allow it. She tried to warn others, hoping someone would listen. But instead of finding allies, she was accused of treason. Her warnings were twisted into accusations, and her actions were seen as a betrayal. Before she knew it, Zorathil was arrested. Her world, once filled with admiration and respect, turned against her. Her comrades, the ones who had once fought by her side, now saw her as a threat. They imprisoned her, stripped her of her title, and sentenced her to exile on an unknown planet. Zorathil's heart sank as she realized that the world she had once loved no longer had a place for her. The ship that carried her away from her people's homeworld was a silent one. The cold, metallic walls of the prison ship reflected Zorathil's thoughts as she stared out of the tiny window. Her heart felt heavy. She had been cast aside, alone in a galaxy filled with enemies and uncertainty. All she could think of was the betrayal, the loss of everything she had fought for. She had given so much to the Valkyrie Empire, but in the end, she was nothing more than an exile. As the ship traveled through the stars, Zorathil could only wonder where she would end up. The Valkyrie had set her adrift, and her future seemed as empty as the vast space outside her window. But Zorathil was not one to give up easily. She had fought too long and hard to simply surrender to fate. She still had her skills, her knowledge of advanced technology, and the burning desire to make a difference. There was still hope, but she had no idea where she would find it. The ship landed with a heavy thud. Zorathil's eyes snapped open, and she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. The planet below her was nothing like her home. Earth, as the humans called it, was a strange and primitive world. Its skies were blue and its forests dense, but the technology was far behind what she was used to. It was a world full of unknown dangers, and Zorathil had no idea how she would survive here. The doors of the ship opened with a hiss, and Zorathil was pushed out onto the unfamiliar ground. She stumbled but quickly regained her balance. The air was thick with the scent of plants and dirt, a sharp contrast to the cold, sterile environment of her homeworld. She took a deep breath, feeling the strange sensation of freedom mixed with fear. She was free from the Valkyrie, but she was also trapped on a world where she knew nothing and no one. Her hands clenched into fists. She had been cast aside, abandoned, but she was not helpless. Zorathil had always believed that her strength came from within. And now, more than ever, she needed to rely on that strength. She was alone, but she was not powerless. For the first time since her exile, Zorathil allowed herself to hope. The humans on Earth might not understand her, but they were survivors too. They fought to protect their world every day. Maybe, just maybe, she could learn something from them. Perhaps she could find a way to use her skills and knowledge to build a new life, or even fight back against the empire that had cast her aside. But for now, Zorathil had to focus on survival. Earth was a world full of mysteries, and Zorathil needed to learn them all. The first step would be finding shelter, food, and safety. The second step, finding a way to fight back against the Valkyrie, even if it meant relying on the humans for help. Zorathil was a warrior, and she had never given up on a fight before. Her exile was only the beginning of her new journey. and Zorathil was determined to make it one worth living. Zorathil stood on the edge of a dense forest, her eyes scanning the horizon. She had spent the past few days wandering through this strange world, learning its sounds, its smells, and its dangers. Every new step she took felt like a small victory, but the vast unknowns of Earth weighed heavily on her shoulders. She had no idea how to survive here. The primitive creatures that roamed the land, from the small and harmless to the larger, more aggressive ones, were a constant reminder of how unprepared she was for this world. Zorathil needed food and shelter, but she had no way of finding either. She had never been trained for survival like the humans of Earth seemed to be. She knew that her strength and intelligence would be her best weapons, but they weren't enough without the resources to back them up. The world was vast and full of strange things. She needed to find others, someone who might help her. But the question remained, who could she trust? As she ventured deeper into the forest, Zorathil suddenly heard the sound of movement behind her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She spun around, ready for a fight, her sharp senses alert. From the shadows of the trees, a group of humans emerged. There were 5 of them, all dressed in rugged clothing and armed with tools. They weren't soldiers, but they looked like survivors. Zorathil's heart raced, and she instinctively prepared to defend herself. The humans looked just as surprised to see her as she was to see them. The leader, a tall man with short brown hair and a hard expression, stepped forward slowly, his hand raised in a gesture of peace. "We don't want trouble," he said in a voice that was calm but firm. "Are you lost?" Zorathil narrowed her eyes. How could these fragile creatures be so calm in the face of an alien like her? She had always been taught that humans were weak and easy to defeat. Yet here they were, standing their ground. It made her pause. "Who are you?" Zorathil asked, her voice cold but controlled. Her hand hovered over the hidden weapon on her waist, just in case. "We're survivors," the man said simply. "Our group is trying to stay off the radar. The world's not what it used to be." Zorathil studied him carefully. She didn't trust them, but they didn't seem hostile. And they were humans, the same species that her people had once considered weak. Yet these humans didn't seem weak at all. There was a hardness to them, a resilience that Zorathil hadn't expected. "What do you want?" Zorathil demanded, her eyes scanning the rest of the group. There was a woman with long black hair, a younger man with a nervous expression, and 2 others who looked older and worn. All of them appeared wary but determined. They were nothing like the soldiers of the Valkyrie fleet. The leader of the group spoke again, lowering his hand. "You look like you could use some help. We can't promise you much, but we can give you food and shelter for a few days, if you are willing to work with us." Zorathil hesitated. She had been alone for so long, she had almost forgotten what it was like to trust anyone. But something about these humans intrigued her. They were kind, in their own way, and the fact that they had survived in such a dangerous world spoke volumes about their strength. "Why would you help me?" Zorathil asked, her voice softer now, though still guarded. She didn't expect an answer that would make her feel safe. She had learned the hard way not to trust others. The Valkyrie had shown her that. The leader shrugged. "We all need help sometimes. You look like you're in trouble, and we know what it's like to be alone. Besides, there's not much left to fight over these days. We take care of each other." Zorathil didn't know what to make of that. Humans had always been known for their sense of community and survival. She had heard stories of how they banded together in times of crisis, but she had never seen it firsthand. These people were different from what she had imagined. "I don't need charity," Zorathil replied. "I can take care of myself." The leader smiled slightly. "We'll see about that. You're a long way from home, and the world here is full of dangers you might not be ready for." Zorathil thought about it for a moment. Maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to learn something new. She could stay on her own, but she knew that Earth was full of dangers she wasn't ready to face alone. The Valkyrie might have exiled her, but that didn't mean she had to give up. There was something in her, something burning deep inside, that told her she could survive. But if she wanted to thrive, she might need help. "Fine," Zorathil said after a moment of silence. "I'll stay for now. But don't think I owe you anything." The leader nodded. "No debts. We'll just work together for as long as it makes sense. Come on, we're heading to our camp. You'll be safe there." Zorathil followed them, her mind still racing with thoughts. Could she trust them? Could she learn from them? One thing was certain. These humans were different from what she had expected. Perhaps this strange world was her chance to discover a new way to fight, a new way to survive. As they walked through the forest, Zorathil's mechanical wings, hidden beneath her cloak, fluttered ever so slightly. She wasn't entirely sure how they would help her on this new world, but she had a feeling that the journey she was about to embark on might just change everything. Zorathil's first few days with the humans were strange and uncomfortable. At first, she had thought they were weak, but the more she watched them, the more she realized that they were far more resilient than she had ever imagined. They had an inner strength, something that came not from advanced technology or powerful weapons, but from a will to survive no matter the cost. Their camp was set in a hidden valley, surrounded by thick trees and rough terrain. It wasn't much, just a small group of tents and a fire pit, but it was home to these humans. They had a simple way of living. They hunted, they gathered, and they made what they needed with their hands. Zorathil had always relied on advanced technology to survive. But here, it was the humans' resourcefulness that kept them going. The leader, whose name was Alan Masters, spent a lot of time showing Zorathil the ways of the land. He taught her how to track animals, how to set traps, and how to use simple tools to make life easier. At first, Zorathil found it frustrating. She was used to complex technology, to systems that worked in precise ways. But here, everything was a little rough around the edges, and the humans had to work with what they had. "Patience," Alan would say whenever Zorathil got frustrated. "We don't always have the perfect tool, but we make do with what we can." Zorathil was not used to this. She had always been surrounded by the finest tools and advanced technology, where things could be fixed and improved with a simple command. But here, she was learning to work with her hands, and it humbled her. The humans, in their simplicity, had mastered survival in ways that no advanced machine ever could. One afternoon, as Zorathil was helping to gather firewood, she overheard a conversation between Alan and a woman named Sarah. Sarah was the group's medic, and she seemed to be the one who kept everyone healthy. The group relied on her knowledge of natural remedies and simple treatments to stay well in this dangerous world. Zorathil had never paid much attention to such things before, but now she found herself listening carefully. "Do you think she's ready for the wings?" Sarah asked, glancing over at Zorathil as she worked. "She's been learning fast, but I'm not sure she's ready to go all in." Alan looked at Zorathil thoughtfully. "She's stronger than she looks, but we can't push her too hard. The wings aren't like anything we've ever worked on before. They're alien." Zorathil's ears perked up. The wings, they were the one thing she had left from her past. They were her connection to the Valkyrie fleet, her last link to the life she had once known. She had kept them hidden from the humans, not because she didn't trust them, but because they were her secret, her last piece of power. After the conversation, Zorathil found herself alone, sitting on a rock by the campfire. Her mechanical wings were carefully folded beneath a cloak she had made, but she couldn't stop thinking about them. Alan had been kind to her, teaching her things she never would have learned otherwise. But there was something about the wings, something that made her feel different. They were a reminder of the warrior she had been, and the warrior she could still become. The next day, Alan approached her with a curious look on his face. He had been watching her closely since they had met, and it was clear he was trying to figure her out. "You've been quiet lately," he said, sitting down beside her. "Is something bothering you?" Zorathil hesitated. She wasn't used to opening up to anyone, especially not a human. but there was something in Alan's eyes that made her feel like maybe it was time to share her thoughts. She glanced around to make sure no one else was nearby, then spoke softly. "I have something I've been keeping hidden. A gift from my people." Alan raised an eyebrow. "A gift?" Zorathil nodded and stood up, pulling off her cloak to reveal the mechanical wings hidden underneath. They were sleek and designed with advanced technology that she had never fully explained to the humans. The wings were powerful, made for flight, but they were also a reminder of the power she had once wielded and lost. Alan's eyes widened as he took in the sight of the wings. What are these?" "These are the wings I was given by the Valkyrie," Zorathil said, her voice cold. "They are a part of me, but I'm not sure how to use them here, on Earth." Alan stood up slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You don't have to do this alone. We've been building things together. Maybe we can help you with these wings too. Whatever it takes." Zorathil looked at him, surprised by his offer. She had expected rejection, not understanding. But Alan's words gave her a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to make the wings work. And if she did, she wouldn't have to fight alone anymore. "Thank you," Zorathil said quietly, her voice soft with gratitude. Alan smiled, a small but genuine smile. "We're in this together. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out." Zorathil stood silently for a moment, her mind racing. She had once believed she was alone in the universe, exiled and forgotten. But now, surrounded by these humans, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging. She wasn't just a warrior anymore. She was part of something bigger. The journey ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since her exile, Zorathil felt ready to face it. Zorathil had never felt so conflicted. The wings, once a symbol of her power and pride, now seemed like a weight she couldn't escape. They had been part of her life for so long, and yet here, on Earth, they felt out of place. She had been exiled from her people, forced to leave her past behind. But now, in this strange new world, the wings were her only connection to who she had been. Alan and the others had been patient with her. They had helped her learn the basics of survival, and now they were offering to help with the wings. It was a difficult decision. She wasn't sure if she was ready to fly again, to embrace the power that had once defined her. But the more time she spent with the humans, the more she realized that the wings could be a key to her future, not just for herself, but for them too. If she could master them, perhaps she could help the humans in ways they couldn't imagine. It was late in the afternoon when Alan approached her with a determined look on his face. "Zorathil," he said, his voice steady, "we've been working on this for a while now. Are you ready to try?" She glanced at the wings, which lay carefully in the clearing, waiting for her. They were sleek and powerful, designed to help her soar through the sky, but she had no idea how to use them here, in this new world. The last time she had used them, it had been in the heat of battle, flying among the stars. Now, on Earth, they seemed almost like a forgotten dream. "I don't know if I can do this," Zorathil said quietly, her voice betraying the uncertainty she felt. These wings were meant for war, not survival. Alan smiled kindly. "They don't have to be for war anymore. We've learned that survival doesn't mean fighting all the time. Sometimes it's about learning to work with what you've got, and these wings are part of who you are. You don't have to fight alone. We're here to help." Zorathil hesitated. She had been on her own for so long, relying only on her strength and her training. But now she had something else. She had the humans, and they had shown her what it meant to rely on others. She could no longer ignore the truth. The wings were part of her, but they weren't just a tool for destruction. They could be used for something better. With a deep breath, Zorathil nodded. "All right, let's try." Alan and the others stepped back, giving her space. Zorathil slowly strapped the wings onto her back, feeling the familiar weight of them. The moment they were in place, she felt a surge of energy, as if the wings had recognized her once again. They hummed with power, waiting for her to command them. "Take it slow," Alan said, his voice filled with encouragement. "You don't need to fly far at first, just get a feel for them." Zorathil nodded and took a few steps forward, her heart racing. She was nervous, unsure of what would happen. The last time she had flown, it had been in the safety of her people's fleet, surrounded by warriors who shared her strength. Now, it was just her, standing on the edge of the forest, surrounded by strangers who were also her allies. The first attempt was shaky. Zorathil flapped the wings gently, feeling the air move beneath them, but she wasn't quite ready to lift off the ground. Her feet stayed firmly planted, and her body felt heavy. She took another step forward and tried again, but the wings only fluttered weakly. Frustration started to rise within her. She had been a skilled warrior, a master of many different forms of combat. But this was something new, something she didn't fully understand. She didn't like feeling uncertain. She didn't like failing. Ellen noticed her frustration and stepped closer. "Don't push yourself too hard. It's okay. You're not going to get it all at once." Zorathil took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She had to trust the wings, trust herself. The first time she had flown, it had been instinct. There hadn't been time to think, only to act. She had trusted her body, trusted her training, and let the wings do the rest. This time, she tried to do the same. She took another step, and then another, focusing on the feel of the wings against her back. With a deep breath, she gave them another powerful flap. This time, the wings caught the air. Zorathil's feet lifted off the ground, and for a moment, she felt the familiar rush of flight. Her heart soared, not from the speed, but from the sheer freedom of it. The world around her seemed to stretch out endlessly, and she felt lighter than she had in a long time. She wasn't just a fallen warrior. She was someone new. Zorathil's hands gripped the wings tightly as she hovered just above the ground. She could feel the wind beneath her, guiding her, pushing her forward. She looked down at the humans below, who were watching her with awe in their eyes. "You did it," Alan shouted, his voice filled with excitement. "You're flying." Zorathil's heart raced, but she smiled. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. She had taken flight again, and for the first time since her exile, she felt like she was in control of her future. She didn't need to be a warrior in the way she once had been. She didn't need to fight for a cause that no longer mattered. She could use her wings for something different, for herself, and for the people who had shown her kindness when she had nothing left. As Zorathil hovered in the sky, the wind lifting her higher, she realized that this wasn't just the first flight of her new life. It was the first step towards something greater. And she was ready for whatever came next. The following days brought a new sense of hope to the camp. Zorathil had gained confidence in her ability to use the wings, and it was clear that her presence was becoming more than just a curiosity. The humans had started to look to her for guidance, not just for her strength, but for the skills she had learned from her people. They were teaching her to survive in a world so different from her own, and she was teaching them, too, in ways they hadn't imagined. Yet, despite all the progress, Zorathil still felt a sense of isolation. She had been part of something larger once, an empire that stretched across the stars. Now she was just one person in a small group of humans struggling to make a life on Earth. But something about this place, about these people, made her feel like maybe she could find a new purpose. One morning, as the sun rose over the camp, Alan approached her with a serious look on his face. "Zorathil," he said, his voice quiet but urgent, "we need to talk." Zorathil raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "There's a situation," Alan said, glancing around to make sure no one else was nearby. "A group of survivors was spotted not far from here. They're in trouble, and we've got to decide what to do. We could help them, but there's a risk." Zorathil felt a knot form in her stomach. She had seen the dangers of Earth firsthand. Wild animals, storms, and even other humans who weren't so friendly. Helping others was always risky, But she had learned from Alan and the others that survival wasn't just about taking care of yourself. It was about helping each other. What kind of risk? Zorathil asked, her tone steady. Are they hostile? We don't know, Alan replied. But they've been surviving on their own for a while, and we've heard stories about how some groups out here have turned to violence. We don't want to make things worse. Zorathil understood. She had learned that the Earth they were living in now was far different from the one she had once known. The laws of survival were constantly shifting, and sometimes helping others could lead to disaster. But she had also learned that without trust, there was little hope. Do we know where they are? Zorathil asked. Alan nodded. Yes, they're about a day's journey to the east. But it's not safe to go alone. I need your help. We'll go together, with a few others. If they're peaceful, we'll offer help. If they're hostile. He paused, looking at her. We'll be ready. Zorathil didn't hesitate. I'll go with you. Alan's face softened. I knew I could count on you. We'll leave as soon as we're ready. Just stay cautious. We don't know what we're walking into. The decision was made, and soon Zorathil found herself standing at the edge of the camp, ready to head out. Alan, Sarah, and a few other members of the group were coming along. They had all become like a second family to Zorathil, and she knew she could rely on them. But this was different. This wasn't just about survival. It was a test of trust. As they made their way east, the terrain grew more difficult. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth, and the sound of distant thunder rumbled in the sky. Zorathil's wings fluttered gently at her sides, a constant reminder of her own strength, but also of the dangers ahead. The journey took longer than expected, and by the time they reached the area where the survivors had been seen, night was falling. They set up camp just outside a thick cluster of trees, the sounds of the forest around them making it clear that they were not alone. Zorathil felt the familiar tension in the air, the kind that came before a battle. But there was something else too, something new. The humans had learned to trust her, and she had started to trust them in return. They didn't see her as a weapon or a tool. They saw her as a person, someone who could help them, just as they had helped her. It was a bond that she hadn't expected to form, but one that felt stronger than anything she had known before. As night deepened, the group sat in silence, waiting. Zorathil scanned the trees, her sharp senses alert. There was movement in the shadows, and she could feel the presence of others nearby. Her wings twitched, ready for action if it was needed. But she didn't draw her weapon, not yet. She didn't want to fight if she didn't have to. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence, calling out from the darkness. Hello? Is anyone out there? The group froze. Zorathil's heart pounded as she turned toward the voice. The figure that stepped out from the shadows was a man, tall and lean, with dirt-streaked clothes and an uncertain expression. He was holding a weapon. Nothing too dangerous, just a crude staff. But it was clear he was ready to defend himself if necessary. We're not looking for trouble, the man said, his voice shaky but sincere. We need help. Please. Alan stepped forward cautiously. We're here to help. We've been tracking you for a while. Are you alone? The man shook his head. No, there are others. We've been surviving out here for months, but we're running low on food and supplies. Please, we don't want to fight. Zorathil felt a sense of relief wash over her. These weren't the violent survivors she had feared. They were just people, struggling to survive in a harsh world. We'll help, Alan said. Let's get you back to our camp. As the man nodded in gratitude, Zorathil couldn't help but feel a new sense of purpose. She had once believed that she was too different, too alien to truly belong. But here, in this camp, among these people, she was beginning to see that perhaps she wasn't so different after all. The trust she had begun to place in these humans was more than just a survival tactic. It was the foundation of something stronger, a community bound together by the need to survive and the willingness to help one another. For the first time in a long while, Zorathil felt like she wasn't alone. The journey back to the camp was longer than Zorathil had anticipated. The survivors, though grateful for the help, were in poor condition. Some were injured, others sick from exposure to the harsh conditions of Earth. They had clearly been struggling for far too long. As they walked, Zorathil kept her eyes open, scanning the dense forest around them. The sounds of the trees creaking in the wind, the distant calls of animals, and the soft rustle of leaves underfoot made the world seem alive, yet dangerous. Her wings fluttered slightly in the breeze, a constant reminder of the power she carried with her. She had come a long way from the warrior she had once been, but the wings were still a part of her, one that she didn't fully understand yet. Alan walked beside her, his expression thoughtful. "You're doing a good thing, you know, helping them." Zorathil didn't look at him right away, but she could hear the sincerity in his voice. "I don't know if I'm doing anything good. I'm just doing what I can. Sometimes that's all we can do," Alan said with a shrug. "You don't have to save the world, Zorathil. Just help the people who need it. That's enough." Zorathil thought about his words. She had spent so much time focusing on her own survival, on the strength she had once wielded as a warrior, that she had forgotten what it meant to help others. The humans had shown her something she hadn't known she needed: the power of community. They worked together, shared their skills, and made sacrifices for each other. Maybe this was the life she was meant to live now. When they finally reached the camp, the group of survivors was greeted with cautious hope. The camp's leader, a woman named Clara, stepped forward to meet them. She was tall, with short dark hair, and an intense expression that softened when she saw the condition of the newcomers. "Thank you," Clara said, her voice rough but filled with gratitude. "We didn't think we'd make it much longer." Alan nodded. "You're safe now. We'll get you the help you need." The humans set to work quickly, offering food, water, and medical supplies to the survivors. Zorathil watched as the humans worked together with such efficiency. It reminded her of how her people had functioned back on Varkar, when they were united under a single cause. But here, on Earth, it was something different. A group of people bound together not by a grand purpose, but by the simple need to survive and help one another. As Zorathil stood to the side, Sarah approached her with a smile. "You did well today, Zorathil. I think they'll be all right." Zorathil nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that lingered in the back of her mind. "It's strange," she said quietly. "I've spent my life fighting, and now I'm trying to help people survive. I never thought I'd be doing something like this." "You're learning," Sarah said with a kind smile. "Everyone is. We all change, depending on the circumstances. And I think you're starting to realize that you don't have to fight all the time to make a difference." Zorathil looked down at her wings, still strapped to her back. They were part of her, and always would be. But maybe they didn't have to be just a weapon. Maybe they could be something more. That night, after the survivors were settled, and everyone gathered around the fire, Zorathil found herself in a quiet conversation with Clara. The older woman looked at her with curiosity, her sharp eyes never leaving Zorathil's face. "I've heard stories about the stars," Clara said, her voice low. "About the world you came from. What happened to you?" Zorathil hesitated. The past felt so far away, like a different lifetime. She had been a proud warrior, a part of an unstoppable force. And now, here she was, trying to learn how to survive on a world that was as alien to her as her people had been to Earth. "My people exiled me," Zorathil said softly. "I failed them." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Exiled? For what?" Zorathil looked into the fire, the flames dancing in the night air. "For losing. For being part of a battle that went wrong. My people saw it as a failure. They sent me here, to this world. And I've been trying to make sense of it ever since." Clara sat quietly for a moment, letting the silence linger between them. Then she spoke again, her voice firm but gentle. "I don't think you're a failure. Sometimes things don't go the way we plan. But that doesn't mean we can't make something new from the pieces of what's left. You're here now, and you've helped us. That's what matters." Zorathil met Clara's gaze, feeling something stir deep within her. For the first time in a long while, she felt as though she might be able to let go of the past. She didn't have to be the warrior she once was. She didn't have to be perfect. All she had to do was be here, now, and help the people who needed her. "Thank you," Zorathil said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I can start over." The night was calm, and for the first time since she had arrived on Earth, Zorathil allowed herself to relax. She had found something worth fighting for. Not a war, not a cause, but something far more important, a place where she belonged. A community. And maybe, just maybe, that was the new beginning she had been searching for all along. Days passed as the survivors settled into the camp. Zorathil's wings were no longer a symbol of her exile, but a reminder of how far she had come. Every day, she worked alongside the humans, helping to rebuild, share knowledge, and teach them the skills they would need to survive. She wasn't just an outsider anymore. She was part of their community, a community that was slowly but surely growing stronger. The survivors who had joined them had found a sense of peace, and their wounds, both physical and emotional, were slowly healing. Clara, the leader of the new group, had proven to be a strong and wise leader. She worked hard to keep everything organized, balancing the needs of the group with the difficult resources available. Zorathil often found herself in conversations with Clara, discussing strategies, resources, and the future of their little camp. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, casting golden light across the camp, Zorathil stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the humans go about their daily tasks. There was a quiet strength in their movements now. It was a far cry from the chaos that had marked the early days when they were just trying to survive. Now, they were beginning to thrive. Zorathil couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had helped them get to this point, and it felt good to know she had contributed. "Morning, Zorathil," Alan greeted, walking up beside her. His face was tired but hopeful. "Looks like we're getting somewhere." Zorathil nodded, her eyes still on the camp. "Yes, it's amazing how much can change in such a short time." Alan smiled. "You've been a big part of that change. Don't forget that." Zorathil turned to him, her expression softening. "I didn't think I could be part of something like this," she said. "I've always thought of myself as someone who needed to fight to lead. But here, I'm just helping. And I think that's enough." Alan placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing more than enough. You're showing us all that there's more to life than just surviving. You've taught us all something." Zorathil felt a warmth spread through her at his words. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a stranger or a failure. She felt like she was where she was meant to be. Later that day, the camp gathered around a large fire to discuss the future. Clara stood at the center, her gaze firm and steady as she addressed the group. "We've made it this far, but we need to keep moving forward. There are still dangers out there, but there are also opportunities. We need to work together to make sure this camp grows, to find more resources, and to ensure that we can defend ourselves if necessary." Zorathil stood in the back of the crowd, listening closely. She knew that they couldn't stay hidden forever. Eventually, they would have to face whatever challenges the world had left for them. But she was no longer afraid. With the humans by her side, she knew they could face anything. "We've all been through so much," Clara continued, her voice filled with emotion. "But we've survived because we've trusted each other. We've learned to rely on each other's strengths, and we've found ways to make this place a home. Now it's time to think about the future." The group murmured in agreement, and Zorathil stepped forward. She didn't normally speak in front of large groups, but something inside her urged her to say something now. "I know what it's like to fight for survival," she said, her voice strong but steady. "I've fought battles, lost wars, and seen entire worlds fall. But I've also seen what happens when people come together. When we share our strength, when we trust each other, we become something more than just survivors. We become a community, and that's what we have here." The group was silent for a moment, taking in her words. Then, one by one, they nodded, their faces filled with determination. Zorathil knew that this was their moment. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were building something better, something worth fighting for. As the meeting concluded, Zorathil found herself walking to the edge of the camp again, her mind full of thoughts about what lay ahead. The world had changed, and so had she. She was no longer the warrior from another planet, lost and alone. She was part of something greater, a group of people who had shown her that survival wasn't just about fighting. It was about creating something new together. Alan joined her once more, and this time he didn't speak right away. He just stood there beside her, watching the camp. Finally, after a long pause, he said, "So, what do you think the future holds?" Zorathil smiled, feeling more at peace than she had in a long time. "I think the future is in our hands. We've come this far, and we can keep going, together." The wind shifted, carrying with it the promise of something new, something hopeful. Zorathil's wings fluttered slightly at her back, as if to remind her of the power she still possessed. But now she didn't need to fly alone. The humans were with her, and together they would face whatever came next. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt ready to embrace it.